Hello everybody, thanks for joining me again today for another session of Me Programming Daily. I hope you have your drink of choice ready. I got myself some nice coffee. I hope you had a nice weekend. Right, so let's get back to wyvern and rendering diagrams. I've done a little bit of homework over the weekend. Mainly, I've done some thinking about how the connections should look like. And before I get to rendering them, I think it would make sense to come up with some constraints. Otherwise, I'll just start running unconstrained in all directions. So constraint number one that I had in mind is to only allow specific type of connection that's not usual. What I mean by a usual connection. Usual connection is line between blocks that we would normally expect, like from start to headline, headline to question, if you can see it. If not, I'll zoom it in. So lines connecting these blocks. So these are the relationships between blocks and this sort of type, a list of blocks. Also, a normal line would be a line leading from a question to both of its branches, the left-hand side branch, which happens to be empty at this time, to the right-hand side branch, and conversely connecting those branches to the following block. From left-hand side to question 1, 2, 3, and from right-hand side branch to question 1, 2, 3. Those I would consider regular connections. And I'm thinking to give them names like alpha class of connections, beta class of connections, delta, gamma, and so on and so on. I don't have a good idea for those categories yet, but I think those would be good to be called expected or normal. However, this is where the complications start. We also have to cater for connections that are not expected, unusual, and this is what is making the whole process of rendering diagrams very tricky. And those are extra connections, namely, in my implementation, these two. So these are maybe identifiers of blocks to which the connection should lead. So say, if we have the right-hand side branch expressed as this type, list of blocks, and also an identifier, a just ID, we won't go from the right-hand side branch to the following block. We will go instead to some other block. Maybe here, maybe somewhere else. The somewhere else is uncharted territory. I don't know what it could be. It could be literally anywhere in the graph, so I'll have to come up with constraints for that. But I think a good starting constraint for unusual or those additional connections would be only blocks that reside on the branch on which the parent resides. So for now, let's only consider just one very simple constraint that will only allow those extra connections, this maybe ID, to flow to the parent and nothing else, just to test the water, see how difficult it would be to implement. Once we have that, we should be in the position to start reasoning about how much space those connections occupy. And that will lead us to the problem that I started resolving some days or weeks ago, mainly how to shift the remainder of the branch to the right if the connections occupy enough space to overlap with the blocks. Okay, so this whole reason why we do another version of this rendering engine is connections and how to render them in a way that would allow us to reason about them quite easily. Now, but before we even come up with that constraint, which I'm pretty happy with, only connect to the parent, only that is allowed for now. we need to rethink slightly how the fork is implemented. And this is what I planned to do today. See, the fork connection allows us to put in place that extra connection not only from the right-hand side list of blocks from this branch, from the right-hand side branch, but also from the left-hand side branch. And I do not believe this is entirely correct. Because it could lead to a situation where we would end up in a loop without any termination conditions, or we would end up with lines crossing. If we go, say, imagine this block exists here. If we go from this block to, say, its parent, the lines will definitely cross. The line connecting the parent and the right-hand side branch with the loop back, let's call it, connection. So we do not want that. One of the main principles of wyvern and Dracon is that the lines should never cross. So what options do we have for extra connections that would originate here in this block that we can't see? Well, we can only see it with our imaginations. Well, not too many. And also, if we do go from this block to a place that wouldn't force us to cross connections, we would lose the ability to render the following blocks, which shakes the foundations of the entire rendering engine. So constraint number 2, which we might implement in the first order, is to only allow those extra connections to flow from the right-hand side branch. Okay. Now, I think that's enough talking. I will need a little bit of a break now to catch a breath. And I'll be back in a second, and we'll start coding. Starting with constraint number 2, we'll remove this maybe. Right. Stay with me, and I'll see you in a second. All right, I'm back. So, how about we start? I don't want to devise a special type for the left-hand side branch, right-hand side branch. We've been through that, and it just introduces a lot of mappings, translators. These types are sophisticated enough, I feel. Now, I'm expecting a lot of things to break now. It's not used anyway. And we'll also have to modify how the parser works. I know that I think it was either last session or second last session. I started working on rendering the shape of a headline, shape of an address. Obviously, this is going to be required, but I don't think it will be required immediately. And also, I want to focus only on the unknowns, because those unknowns will shape what's coming. What we know that needs to be done, we can also predict the aftermath of implementing those knowns. So I feel we're going to get more value from focusing on the unknowns, because they will shape what's to come. Okay, that is done. Now let's see the parser. So we have fork. Reasonably simple. See, this is what I'm aiming for. Like very simple code. That's very easy to change in case something changes. This is going. It will shift some things around. That was 3. Was it 3? No. 1, 2, 3, 4. That was 4. We don't need to worry about this. This is the most critical part of my work, formatting. No. Block, maybe AT. Block is the return type. Sorry about that. Oh no, sorry. This should stay. This goes. Token, left, right, right AD. Nothing should change. Perfect. That's good. So the first part is done. We remove this ID. Now I'm kind of anxious to take another step. So one part of my brain suggests that I now focus on implementing the validation conditions for those connections that we would be flowing back to the parent. But the more pragmatic part of my brain reminds me that we're doing this for a reason and it's a known, so probably not the best first candidate to be worked on. What I mean by that is if we, instead of working on those validations criteria, focus on why we do this in the first place to resolve the unknown, that will yield more long-term benefits. So let's remind ourselves why we work on those connections. That is to be in the position where managing those connections, managing their width and the amount of space they occupy is easier. So what the pragmatic part of my intuition suggests is that we now focus on maybe carving out a path for checking the width of those conditions if we detect them. So a very simple condition like that would be if we are calculating the width of a fork and we have one of those connections, add a specific width to it. Let's see if that works. So first of all, let's shape this diagram a bit better. Let's assume that action we don't have any of those extra conditions or connections anywhere. Oh, look at this. Oh, that was a headline. Sorry. So we had to have it. Sorry. So let's assume we don't have any of those extra conditions except the address. However, we introduce one, and it's going to be here, from question to 3. And that is going to lead us to, let's see the parser. Skewer solo ID and skewer solo ID. Let's just ID. Okay, so it would be here. So these don't need IDs. Only this needs an ID. So let's say we're following that constraint that I mentioned today. We can only connect to the parent. Let's see if it parses. It should. Perfect. We're obviously not drawing any lines. But having that loop back from 3 back to 1, it means that we will shift or change the width of this fork, therefore impacting the width of the entire block here. or of the entire skewer. Or sorry, block skewer. What are we talking about? The width of the entire left-hand side branch. And see action. Let's call this last action. Last action originates in the first question. Let's render it for a better overview. Let's remove some of those actions to give a better overview. Question 1. Question 2. This should look much better. Like so. So what it means is, if we have a loop back like this, I would like to artificially inflate the width of the left-hand side branch and see what happens. Okay, so let's quickly get on that. Width. If we have a connection, let's leave a comment here. 0.6. Here we're going to add a whole 1.1. Oh, sorry, 1.0. So if everything is working fine, last action should be shifted a little bit to the right. And it is. Perfect. However, if we change this last action to question 3, the relationship between the widths and distances of left-hand side branch and right-hand side branch of question 3 should not change. Only the width of this gap should change. Action 2, 3, 4. Beautiful. This is what we wanted. Now, is it that easy? I think it is. Because if the only connection allowed goes from right hand side branch to the parent, it will never cross with anything because that space is always empty. So we go here, perfect, here, question 1, no problem. And now, in the upcoming sessions, I would like to start lifting that constraint, allowing maybe for that extra connection to venture a little bit higher up, because why not? Technically, there's nothing wrong with allowing action 2 to link not only with question 2, but also going, but instead going over question 1, over first question, all the way to headline. Then we would open ourselves to potentially overlapping with this loopback, if there is one. And we would also open ourselves up to potentially crossing this connection from first question to question 3. But would it be so difficult to validate for the presence of those colliding connections? I don't think so. So for now, I don't think we'll have time to do it during this session, but I think a reasonable next step for us would be to provide some sort of visual indication of a loopback, whether it's a fully blown, correctly rendered line that goes from the bottom of the block through the right hand side here, or whether it's just a simple line. And then we can sort of take it further and experiment with loosening up this constraint of action 2 can only connect to its parent. Yeah, I think that would be reasonable for the next and upcoming sessions to provide this sort of high-level visual indication of a loopback, action 2 to question 2, action 1 to question 1. And then we can start loosening up the constraints. Right, so I think we'll wrap it up here for today. Thank you very much for your attention today, for sticking with me. And I wish you a fantastic day and take care of yourselves. And I hope to see you very soon.